Hey guys, welcome to another Transforming Esports Podcast. I'm sat today with a very, very special guest. We have Mac, the head coach of Vitality, here with us. Mac, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. It's a lovely grey morning in Berlin, but we're going to talk about coaching, so it makes it a good day already.
Perfect. So off season for you right now, right? The nice slow period in coaching, or is this
uh, so, well, when did we go out? I think we went out in June or July. I haven't really taken many days off since then. I'm not going to lie. Interestingly enough, the like we've taken this as an opportunity to do all of the really like long-term high quality projects and really build out our intention for the next year uh, in a way that's kind of blank slate at Vitality and builds a lot on top of our intentions coming into this project. And when I say we, I mean mostly Pat and I. Um, and we've worked our socks off the last few months, and now we're in Berlin for our boot camp with the new roster, which is awesome and fun. Very intense, and so honestly, it's still a pretty intense period for me. I have got to see my family, which is kind of the most important thing. But yeah, still plugging away.
Yeah, I mean coaching can definitely be that all engulfing intensive job, right? Actually just while we're on that topic of off season, what does a good off season look like? Whether you start it in January or not January, June, July, or you're starting it, closer to October, November. What is that purpose of the off season, especially because you've been so vocal about these long-term projects? That off season is such a useful vehicle for you as a coaching staff or even for the rosters. How do you use them?
I think number one thing is resting well, like resting effectively rather than just resting, right? A lot of the time, kind of in the past, especially when I was a bit younger and I was a bit more prone to burning out, by the end of the split, I would be really like just in need of a break and I would go home and be a slob for like 2 weeks. I would do nothing but just like exist and eat 5,000 calories a day and like really kind of, I guess, treat myself. And that over time, that's gotten less and less. But I would find that a lot of the people in the team that I would work with, I would do that for a week, 2 weeks, whatever it was until I needed, and then start working again. And I would find that a lot of I found it really hard because you move between different countries, and so all of your like habits and your routines, because you're in a totally different environment, you drop them, and it takes a lot of work to build them back up. And that's taken me a lot of time to be able to apply consistently, to be able to keep consistent with my routines that keep me feeling good and keep me performing well, even while moving between different countries, moving between different houses. Like I move around a lot in the off season, especially now that I have a daughter because we go and visit all of the family and stuff like this and stay with people. So that's really challenging. And I think that challenge was even more noticeable in a lot of the players I worked with. Where you'd come back after a 3 month break or a 2 month break and be like, you know, so are you ready to compete again? And be like, no, I haven't played solo queue in 6 weeks. I'm going to bed at 5 a.m. every morning. Like the routines would just be totally destroyed, right? And that time was effectively just being wasted. Um, from a rest perspective, because people wouldn't come back that rested. They would come back like in horrendous, like physical state, sleep state, all of that stuff. But also just in terms of actually using the time productively, right? So resting effectively, using the time productively, setting clear intentions is a big part of it, kind of with the team internally. For the staff specifically, then I would say for us, as I said, we try to do a lot of our like high detail work. When you're in the thick of the season, you don't have time to go back and do like a really detailed retrospective on things, right? So we make sure that we debrief effectively, have a really clear internal narrative of what went wrong and what we're aiming for, so that the intention is really clear for the next year. And then from a kind of League of Legends and learning perspective, we go in, we learn, right? And we learn in a way that's really specific, really detailed, really specialized. So you might go away and specialize in a new position coaching topic, right? So one of the things we often set for our coaches is okay, like, and I did this. This was something that I think Peter introduced me to when I was on Splice and did a wonderful job of and helped me so much in my development. And then this has become standard practice for us from now. Okay, so you're a position coach or you're a coach working at Vitality now, and you've been position coaching a player, let's say it's a mid laner for the last split. In the off season, I want you to go away and I want you to go and find some ERL teams, some South American teams, some Australian teams, like whatever. And I want you to go and position coach an AD carry or a top laner, right? And take the time to be able to specialize in that role in order to build up a higher degree of expertise in another area of the game in which you're not familiar. And that increases a person's holistic understanding of the game to such a great extent, right? So that's just one example of a really specific and detailed project, right? It could be anything. It could be investigating a specific team, a specific player, a specific champion, a specific stat, right? And all of the same things apply to building up our kind of scouting profiles and things like this, right? So from like an off-season perspective, there's then the like team building part of it, which is a totally different kettle of fish, and that again is very much about the internal objectives that we set ourselves in terms of where are we in the project right now? What is our aim for next year? Did we achieve our aim for this year? And who is the person that we need to take us to the next level? And then we go out and we find that person, right? And I think defining the niche, we call it hiring inside out, defining the niche for what exactly you're looking for before you go and look at it, I think is really important because once you start actually comparing players, watching VODs, interviewing people, it's so easy to fall in love with a player who's just not the right fit for your team.
Yeah, it reminds me very much like I've been getting more into Football Manager recently. It's like that scouting profile, right? Like you have to build the
Mm-hmm.
scouting profile so then you know what your funnel kind of looks like rather than just throwing the net out, seeing whatever fish you get, and then picking and choosing from there. I think that's really interesting. You you and you particularly have been very vocal about long-term projects, or at least working in a long-term project with Vitality. Just looking at esports more generally, many coaches aren't afforded that luxury. Very few are. Um, how did how did you manage to get there? What are the secret ingredients into convincing an organization, so to speak, to giving you the reins for something long term?
First thing, I think it's fair to say that I had a lot of luck and a lot of opportunities that other people didn't. Uh, Going all the way back to 2018, I spent 2 years watching other coaches be head coaches before I was a head coach. And over those 2 years, you build up a really clear idea of the things that you don't want to do, because it's very easy to watch someone else and say, I wouldn't do that. I would do something different, right? So I had really clear ideas about potential pitfalls that I didn't want to fall into, which I think helped. And then I had a really smooth transition because I had Peter standing behind me, helping ease me into all the pressures of being a head coach, right? So I think I had a huge number of advantages there already. And at that point, then, by the end of 2020, 2021 was my first year without Peter, just as a head coach on my own, which is a very lonely role sometimes, right? But by that time, I had a lot of advantages, a lot of trust, like a really strong relationship that was already built up with the management in Mad Lions, right? And then when you win back to back in 2021, you get a certain amount of kind of freebies, right? And we did okay from there, right? So I think there's for sure a lot of kind of historical context behind it. In terms of things that I think actively help, I think that one of the most important skills for head coaches, which I see as uh, not something which a lot of people are currently doing in esports, is managing upwards, right? Having really, really clear communication and really actually a lot of inclusivity, as well as clear boundaries with kind of upper management, should we call it, right? Um, and that's something that I put a lot of time and effort into, and it's a huge time sink. It's a huge effort, right? But when you cultivate that relationship and you're honest with it as well, and you set clear expectations and you make sure that everyone is on board with the process. Everyone understands what the intention is, where we are, where we're going, and what were the mistakes along the way, and what was my role in those mistakes. If I make a mistake, I'm going to be the first person to tell Neo or Anne, like, the upper management and Vitality, like, I messed this up, and here's what I'm doing to fix it, right? So this is something that I learned at Mad Lions as well, just from the specific personal relationship that I had with Adam, the CEO there, and I was really lucky to have that relationship as well, because Mad Lions was really weird in that, it was during COVID and all types of stuff were going on where, like, Mad Lions, because the upper management was in Canada, it was just me and Till, who's now is he a director or an executive? I think he's an executive there now. But Till, it was just me and Till doing it, right? Because
Mm.
management, upper management in Canada couldn't be involved because they were so far away geographically. They had so little context of what's happening inside the team, right? So this level of trust was built up, and working in a relationship like that with Adam, this is Adam Adamu, what I came to realize was that the conversations were always easy if I came with, hey, here's a problem, or here's the mistake that happened, and here's what we've already done to fix it. So you don't need to worry about it. It's being handled, you know? And I think just taking that approach towards life, of taking ownership of your mistakes, we're big believers at Vitality and the concept of extreme ownership. If you don't know Jocko Willing, go search Jocko Willing. The guy's a boss. Um, and being proactive with finding solutions, right? And I think when it comes to management, taking that approach of everything being clear, everything being honest, ownership being taken, solutions being provided, you'll naturally get buy-in. You'll naturally get support. Even after we had a complete disaster in summer with Vitality, the relationship that I have with the upper management there is still really solid. So, and that's because of all the work we put into building the foundations. And the difference that makes for them personally, right, is that if you're an owner or a person in Vitality who is in Paris and you're looking at what's happening with our team and you're looking at one of the disastrous games we play, like people will panic, and people will spend a whole week panicking if they don't know what's going on, right?
Mm.
But in Vitality, people get a report pretty soon after we've played a game. I try very hard to make sure that there's open lines of communication about what went wrong and what we're doing to fix it, right? And that soothes a lot. And that helps everyone be on board with the process. And actually, it helps them know how to support us in that process as well.
Yeah, it's like that's such rich learning actually, because it's like the state of limbo if you're management, because you can't actually go sometimes to the ground floor and be like, fix this, fix this, fix this, because otherwise, what's the point of having you as the coach there or having a coach there at all, if that's what you're gonna do? And yeah, I think that open door, open line of communication policy just helps, right? It just that person who's paying your bills and paying your wages effectively isn't in limbo of does he know that this is an issue, or does he is he
Yeah.
actually doing something to fix it? And I think that's really good. Does that by extension does is that how you and Pad work, given you guys have extensive time working together with each other?
I think Pat and I are now at the point where we're kind of one hive mind. We have what I describe as shared consciousness, I think is the technical term for it. Um, and usually it's fascinating because we're very different people and we take very different approaches, and we will often go away even during the off season and study something that's totally different. Like I'll go away and study one team, he'll go away and study a specific player for a position coaching project or something. And we'll both come back in the middle and meet and be like, hey, I found this, and like, hey, I really like this concept. And so often it'll be the same thing, or it'll be different like formations of expressing the same thing.
Mm.
Um, so I think that he and I are very, very synced up. I think we're also naturally synced up, but that's also because, and this applies to management, this applies to coaches, like trust that you have is built. Um, and Pat and I have spent the last 3 years, almost 4 years now, building trust. He joined us in 2021. He's brought up through the whole system that we've operated, which is a system that has been going since like in its like infancy, 2018, right? Because the
Mm.
things that I spent, uh, you know, the ways in which I have spent kind of helping Pad develop as a coach and informing the formation of his personal coaching philosophy are extensions of what Peter taught me in 2018 and 19 and 2020, right? So there is this continuity, and having that continuity helps to create a really strong culture. When people have a strong culture, they understand, as you said earlier, there's this filter for decision making, right? Because they understand what is expected of them and what is important. And when you have a similar understanding of what's important, you tend to arrive at decisions which, if not are necessarily the same execution of the decision, they align with one another, right? The point is to have alignment and then to have freedom within the system. And I think Pat and I are a good example of that, where we both trust each other entirely. And the same for all of the coaches at Vitality, honestly, even the management as well. Like everyone that works at Vitality, my policy is that they understand what is the most important thing here, what are the values that are important to us. Now that you understand that, you have license to do whatever you want. And as long as you're taking decisions with those values in mind, I'm never going to tell you it was a wrong decision. I might tell you that it could have been optimized or that you made a mistake or whatever, but I'm never going to be angry at you for making a decision. Like, let's say that our like ownership is one, right? Okay. It's really actually it's really hard to like mess up on extreme ownership when you understand the concept. So let's look at another thing. Let's say that we're talking about mm, what would be a value that I would specifically translate into something like that? Okay, so for us, like empathy is a big part of it, right?
Mm.
Being able to tailor a coach's approach to an athlete is really, really important for us. So let's say a coach makes a decision unilaterally that I don't know about the way that they coach a player, the way that they inform a player about something, or tells a player they can come late to the office, or whatever it is, right? That it's just something that perhaps inconveniences the team and ends up being a bit awkward. As long as that decision was made in the right spirit, with the understanding that what's important to us is that we treat players in a way that fulfills their individual needs
Mm.
and that those individual needs are different and need to be catered to from a coaching perspective. I'm not going to be angry. I might say, okay, this needed to be communicated with me and this didn't work because of this and you should have checked this before making this decision, etc., 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 etc. But I'm
Mm.
not going to be angry that you made that decision because it aligns with the philosophy that we have.
Yeah, that really makes sense, right? Because sometimes, a player just needs that extra 15 minutes in that day. Maybe he's gone through something hard the day before or whatever, right? And he might need bit of time to get ready for team training. But so that aligns with it. Is just keeping that information running around the coaching staff so everyone can then use that 15 minutes delay effectively, productively, bringing it back to like kind of the start of the conversation with the off season. Something you've touched on a lot is this absorption of knowledge and this passing on of knowledge from Peter, from the start of your career, and in part you then passing it on to to Pat, kind of like generational coaches. Um, what's
Generational trauma passed down from one coach to another.
what's been some of your, not even some, but what would you say is like the highest value piece of advice that you've received or you've given? Because you have been working in a very structured environment for so long at the top of our scene. Um, there must be some really interesting conversations going around beyond the coaching staff, and maybe I'm being a bit nosy here.
Oh, that's a great question. That's a really great question because it's you live in this absolute whirlwind, and so much of the knowledge absorption is kind of it's in your unconscious, right? And it just turns into this kind of gut feeling that you have. Um, but there are so many factors that mess with it, and it's so hard. Sometimes it's so easy to when you're in this like 100 mile an hour into, oh my God, I'm so dead, I need to rest, and then next split, you don't have time to actually reflect on those things. So it's so easy to forget so many details about conversations that you had with people. Let me think. Hmm. I actually think that one thing that I already mentioned empathy, and it's funny. I'll be talking about empathy on another podcast later as well, specifically because it's so core to my coaching philosophy. Um, that, but when I first joined Splice, had no clue about the value of empathy. And actually, I wouldn't say I was a very empathic person naturally. I think that I'm a very people focused person, but that I've always actually struggled quite a lot to read people's emotions, read their body language, stuff like this. Like these things are not intuitive to me. Um, and Peter actually really taught me the value of empathy, right? Having a lot of these conversations behind the scenes of like, Peter, why did you let this player come late to the office today, for example? And he's like, well, because XYZ and this is going on in his life and this is really important to him and this thing happened in his past and didn't you remember this thing that he once said? And like picking up on those small details was like, wow, holy moly. And this was a kind of a whole new world to me, honestly. And so a lot of my uh, kind of skill in empathy as a coach is just learned. It's just stuff that I had to practice because I wasn't naturally good at it at that point. Um, so I would say that has been one. Um, what else? Mm, this is not necessarily advice that I have given or been given, but it's something that I've learned over the years that actually now I would say is probably the most important thing to me personally, uh, and it's integrity.
Mm.
Surrounding myself with people with integrity. I'm really inspired by Warren Buffett. I love Warren Buffett. I'm really interested in investing and just studying great investors because I think investing is so much about human psychology. Uh, and it's funny because, there's a lot of debate about can you have an ethical billionaire and things like this. I think if there is an ethical billionaire, I think Warren Buffett is probably one of them. If there is only one, I think he's probably the only one. That would be one of my guesses at least. Um, but you don't necessarily tend to associate ethics and integrity with someone who's a billionaire, right?
Mm.
And there's a quote that I love from Buffett. There's lots of quotes that I like from Buffett, but one that stood out to me recently, particularly, is find people with energy, intelligence, and integrity. And if they don't have the third one, don't even bother with the first two. And I love that so much because mm, surrounding yourself with the right people is by far, if you ask me, the most important ingredient to success. And not just success, but also your happiness as a person. And what the right people are depends on you, right? But um, to me, especially since I became a father, that that is really novel thing in esports. There are not many fathers in esports currently, certainly not as esports coaches. That I know there's like me and Coma. I don't know anyone else. And
Peter
I'm
now as well, right?
he's retired now.
Oh yeah,
I
true.
mean, he's not actively coaching. I don't even know if Coma's actively coaching in the same way that he was before, but I can imagine he's working pretty hard, right? But yeah, Peter is the other one. Joe Youngbuck is the other one, right? But certainly is there's not many of us, right? And the perspective has been a big change there, and I think in an industry that chases short-term returns, that chases the 1 year return or like maybe the 2 year return, so often integrity is overlooked.
Mm.
Uh, and for me, actually, surrounding yourself with people who will do the right thing, even when it's hard, uh, is so valuable. It's so, so, so valuable. And I think that's from like a kind of a business perspective, a performance perspective, a personal perspective, like an emotional perspective, like even a selfish perspective of it's just going to be better for your self-development as a person. Um, but for me, now that I'm in this kind of unique position where, esports is not built up in the same way that traditional sports is, where, if you have a kid, everything is like kind of handled. We're not there yet in esports, right? And I'm not saying, there are challenges that professional sports people have that you couldn't even begin to dream of. I'm not particularly educated about their interpersonal lives, and I'm sure it's really, really hard. I think a lot of them travel much more than I do, for example. Um, but for sure, a lot of the challenges that I'm currently going through, being a father, being a new father, are like challenges that other people in esports are like, oh, that's new, like I've not seen that one before, right? And that whole dynamic with integrity is something that is so important to me because if you are part of Vitality, you get all of the best hours of my day. You get all of the best version of me. You get 100%. I'm a very obsessive person. I'm kind of all or nothing person.
Mm.
Um, and I'm ride or die. Um, and that means that the people that are on my team are going to be intimately involved with my family. Um, and that means that the people who are on this team need to be people that I'm okay with my daughter being around.
Mm.
And even if you don't have a child, like I think that's an amazing way to look at life, actually. You know, I had this recently where I'm looking at like investments. I'm like, okay, if I were making investments for my daughter, what would I buy this? You know, and the answer when you look at I don't know a lot of crypto stuff or like really fast-paced tech stocks or whatever it is no. And I think there's a great comparison there, right? Like, sure, you might have an insanely talented player, but if this person is not the type of person that I would want to raise my daughter around, I think that's a high enough bar to sort out their kind of strength of character that actually it can be really useful. And actually I would much rather take the less talented inverted commas because short spoiler, I don't really believe in talent, not in the same way that other people use the word talent. Uh, I don't. Actively try to avoid using the word because I dislike so many of the ramifications of the word talent.
Mm.
Um, but I would much rather take the right person over the better player, the more talented player.
Mm.
Uh, and I think that that's personally, we'll see. We'll see if it works out. I think we have players who are very skilled and also the right people. Personally, I think our team on Vitality is now full of the right people, and that makes me really happy. And I think that that's going to make us more successful than a lot of other teams who choose the short-term approach of the better player at the expense of integrity.
I'll give you another book. Obviously, in the pre-show, we were talking about a few books. There's a really good book if you hate the word talent. It's called The Tyranny of Talent by Dr. Joe Baker. He's one of the leading researchers in the field of talent ID, talent development in traditional sports. I think it's a really good book to read. I think you might end up agreeing with a lot of things he says.
Mm.
Um, but you touched on it, and I'm so happy you touched on it because you've given me the perfect segue. We live in a world, just generally, and especially in esports, where the short-term gain is often more times valued than the long-term gain. With you and your team being very public about long-term, there's a few characteristics that come to my mind. So such as like goal setting, such as patience, such as adjusting and like moving the goalposts a little bit. What does that look like for you on the ground? How do you know you're heading in the right direction? How do you know when to adjust? How do you know when to stick or when to twist? Because these are such big things. Even if you're working in a short-term project, we still face these challenges, whether it's should we go down this meta read or should we change our meta read? And
Mm.
now you're working on such a larger time scale. Are we sticking with this roster? Who are we subbing on this roster? Are we staying with the same coaching staff? All of these things. They're such more complex questions. I'd love to understand what it looks like for you at the ground.
Yeah, that's great. Great question. So I had so many ideas there that I had to write a few of them down while you were talking because I think it's so broad and it depends how abstract you want to get with it, right? Um, I think from a fundamental standpoint, my view is that continuous marginal improvement, the atomic habits, the Team Sky British Olympic cycling team approach is at the core of a lot of things we do, right? And that what that means is that you are aiming to improve by a very small margin every single day. And you're also aiming to improve all of the things that are, even if it's a tiny, tiny thing and you think this might give you a 0.1% edge, then you look for the edge, right?
Hmm.
Those are kind of the two things. And as long as we're improving, that's okay. And another segue into investing. um, there's a really interesting idea here, which is at play here, and it's not literal in the case of human beings, I think. And James Clear, who writes Atomic Habits, goes into this of the idea that compounding is really unintuitive.
Hmm.
If you look at a set of numbers and you say, okay, this amount of money increases by 10% every year for 30 years, then it's this much. Let's say you take so over the last 100 years, the S&P 500, which is the 500, like the index of the 500, kind of not biggest but brightest stocks in the US market, has returned approximately 9.5% per year every year if you average it out over the last 100 years ish. This is
Hmm.
roughly speaking. Let's say you put $100,000 into that index fund or euros, whatever, and it returned that amount over 30 years. How much money do you think you'd have at the end? 10% every year for 30 years.
Oh my God, my brain's just farted.
it's
I wouldn't be able to do that in my head right now. But
it's complex maths. The maths for that is 100,000 times 1.1 to the power of 30.
30,
That's
yeah,
like how you do the
yeah.
calculation, right? And the answer is 1.7 million,
Mm.
right? From a return of 9.5% over those 30 years, in the first year you get you get $9,500, right?
Yeah,
And in the last year you get a couple $100,000
yeah.
just from the same return, right? And the idea is that like compounding is so unintuitive. Like that maths, how big that number gets and how large the return gets in the final year is so unintuitive to human beings. It's often described as the eighth wonder of the world, right?
Hmm.
Um, Fun fact, something like 90% of Warren Buffett's wealth, being one of the richest people in the world, was generated after he became 65 because of the way the compounding maths works, right?
Yeah.
He's just been in the market for so long because he started investing when he was like 12 or something. He bought his first stock when he was
I
like,
need a time machine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's been in the market for like, whatever it is, 80 years or something.
Hmm.
And when you've done that for that long, the compounding in the last 20 years just obliterates all the gains that you had in the first 60 years, which is just incredible, right? The math, and that is so unintuitive. And I think the same thing applies to human behavior, right? That compounding, when you take all these tiny little gains you add them all together, you think, okay, you have a 1% improvement here and a 1% improvement here, and you add them all together and you're like, right, so I improved 10%. No, because you multiply them, right? They add on top of each other and you end up with this positive spiral that is really unintuitive, where suddenly everything clicks and everything works and everything feels good, right? And that's kind of what we're aiming for as coaches, right? Is this kind of process of continual improvement. Um,
Just to
did you want to
challenge
did
you,
you want to cut in there?
yeah, just to challenge you a bit there. Obviously, when we talk about the markets and all of these things, obviously the idea of compounding is infinite, right? You can compound to infinity.
Yeah.
Now, there's always been this idea in the learning space of diminishing returns,
Hmm.
which is kind of the opposite to compounding, right? Like once you reach a point of compounding where you're actually getting less than what you were getting before.
Hmm.
So it's like the reverse of that. Where do you see the relationship between these two, especially when it comes to maybe learning and coaching in
Hmm.
esports?
I don't think it's a direct analog between compounding mathematically and compounding in humans. I think it's more of a kind of paradigm shift of the way you see all of the small things in your life, right? And all the habits and the
Sure.
way that they stack up with each other. So it's for sure there is going to be a point of diminishing returns. What I would say personally, and I don't necessarily have the expertise to back this up, but I would say that it depends on where you are investing that extra bit of time, right?
Of course.
Um, if you've played okay, one of our players last year played 1,400 solo queues. He's very young and he's at a point in his career where investing the time into playing 1,400 solo queues is going to pay off. In 5, 6, 7, 8 years' time, if he's still playing 1,400 solo queues a year, maybe that's the right thing for him as a person. But maybe if he cut 100 of those and invested that amount of time into other things that were broader, he would get much more return, right?
Mm.
Um, there's a concept that I introduced the players to yesterday, actually, from a book called Range by a guy called David Epstein. Wonderful book. And the conclusion from this book, essentially, very short TLDR, is that leaders can benefit immensely from developing what he calls a T-shaped expertise graph, where you have the bottom bit of the T is this really, really deep, really specialized root of your expertise, right? That's the 1,400 games of solo queue that you played every year for 10 years, which is an insane amount of time at the end of those 10 years, right? Um, and the top bar of the T is a little bit of lots and lots and lots of different things which can add value to make what you're doing more effective, to make what you're doing more efficient, right? And this is kind of the working smart component of working hard as well, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that would be the where I see the point of diminishing returns kicking in, and that's I think how you kind of get around it is by expanding more broadly. Because teams in League of Legends are really complex. They're really, really complex environments. You look at T1 this year, they changed theirs for Doran. They just won 2 world championships in a row. They went to 3 finals in a row. Is that team going to make world finals again? I can't tell you. I have no idea because teams are such complex environments because people are complex and one tiny change can make the most insane amount of difference, right? You look at FPX 2019, they won worlds and it wasn't even close. They stomped everyone. They were the best team in the world, bar none, by a huge margin in 2019. They changed Gimgoot, a player who everyone thought was totally past it, for Nuguri, who was arguably the best top laner in the world that year and they sucked. They didn't even make worlds, right? Um, Teams are really, really, really complex environments. Um, so in that type of environment, being able to apply a little bit of sports psychology or a little bit of negotiation skills or a little bit of traditional sports understanding can deepen your not only your League of Legends understanding, but also your personal understanding with the people around you. And that can make a
Mm,
massive, massive, massive difference, right? At the end of the day, the person who gets, who's hit this point of diminishing returns, they can choose to invest an hour of their time into getting 0.0000001% better, right? Or picking up a champion that they might play once per year, right? Or they can try to get the four guys around them to all be 1% better.
mm.
And if you look at it that way, then it's really hard to hit a point of diminishing returns, right? And the player who manages to do that, the player who manages to make all of their teammates 1% better, is probably going to be the most valuable player on your roster, right? And that's my personal opinion of why Faker is such a good player. A, because he's adaptable and he has this specialization, right? Where he has played in every single meta, and so he actually has this really deep root of in-game knowledge for all of these different meta champions, and he's been good on all of them, right? So he's intensely adaptable, thanks to the hard work that he's put in, presumably. He also makes all the teammates around him better. If you go listen to T1's comms, if you like see the way that his presence impacts the players around him, it's incredible. You see the way that players play when they're playing with him versus when they're not playing with him. There's a real tangible difference, if you ask me. And I think that's what makes Faker, like, for me, the greatest player of all time. And I wasn't even so huge on that opinion until a couple of years ago, but actually, and there's some recency bias because he just won Worlds twice, right? But the more I look into Faker, the more I love this guy's attitude
Mm.
towards being a teammate and being a leader. And the more I start to think that actually this guy might be one of the best leaders in esports.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a powerful sentiment, right? It's not only enough to just be a good player, but you need to be a good teammate. Because if you can't work with them and you can't make them want to work with you, then you hit so many hurdles along the journey, but then also on stage, when that stress and that pressure is on you, how do you communicate? How do you help each other stay in that optimal mindset? Also changes because you haven't taken the time to understand who they are, how they respond to adversity, what does their flow state look like, things like that. You know, it's such an important way of thinking. And I loved the T shape as well, right? As you said, I instantly started thinking Tetris, and it's like you don't want to be lopsided, right? You don't want to just be
Yeah.
you don't want to be a straight line because it's good, you know. It's when you're playing Tetris, you're waiting for that straight line, but then when you got the T shape, you can cover a lot of space and you can plug in a lot of gaps that way.
Mm.
And which is also really useful, right? You're really good at your role, what you're getting paid to do, but then you also have an understanding of, oh well, I play on a Smurf account, and let's say I'm the jungler, I'm playing support. Now I can actually communicate really well with my support because I understand how his role feels for him, for
Mm.
example.
Yeah, yeah. And that is funny you bring that up because this year in the off season, one of our like detailed, like long projects that we would never do during the season was okay, Haley and Lincus swap and duo with each other and review together, right?
Yeah, I love this
Hilly, I
idea.
want you to teach Lincus support, and Lincus, I want you to teach Hilly jungle because we felt that they didn't have this shared understanding of the way that they saw the game together, right? And this was one of the ways that we were like, okay, let's take a step here, right? Let's take a step towards understanding each other better, and I think that will bear fruit.
I love that idea. Like when I was head coaching in again minor ERLs at NLC Div 2, one of the things I set the players is, okay, guys, we don't actually get enough contact time as a team because we're all part time. None of us are paid. You know, we're all across the world, and I was living in India at that time, and scrims would start at like 11 p.m. and at like 3
I
a.m.
know
my
that
time. And I was like, oh, okay.
one.
Don't really want to be here when I'm not getting paid that much, you know, every night. And also people are busy with school and work and whatnot. So I said, guys, right now, one of the highest value things we can do is just go into flex queue. I know it's not a perfect training environment, but just play off role, and just hang out with each other. Try and win, and trust me, you guys will understand how it feels. So the next time you want to shout at your jungler for not ganking, you know why he hasn't ganked. And we will waste we won't waste as much time in review. One of the hardest challenges for me as a coach, and this could also possibly be maybe I didn't go in the right way, and I'd love to hear your advice, is sometimes players, even though they understand it and they can see the value, they just say no. And often when you ask them why, it's like, well, the Koreans aren't doing it this way.
Mhm.
How do you how do you break down that wall, and how do you help them overcome this idea of there is actually a set in stone right way to train? Because I don't personally believe there is a right way to train. it really depends on the pieces you have around you and the objectives you're trying to create.
For sure, for sure. I mean, that is a really tough question. It's something we are putting a lot of time and thought into figuring out our exact answer to it. I think it has lots of different components, and I think there are lots of different ways. First of all, I think it probably needs to be gradual, right? I think
Mm,
there's a gradual push towards this in esports. More and more nowadays, we're seeing the LEC teams being like, all right, we won't scrim other LEC teams, then we'll scrim our academy team. Right? And that's something that didn't actually exist that long ago, you know. So I think there's a gradual push towards it. I think having shared understanding and shared relationships between those teams. Like if you have an academy team and an LEC team that are essentially just two totally separate entities, they're going to be looking at each other like, what can I get from this? Versus the way that I want our mentality to be is, how do we make this good for everyone? Right.
mm,
And I think it's much easier to have that mentality when you have a shared understanding and you have relationships, like you were saying, right? Like I want my academy players and my LEC players to actually have relationships between each other. I want them to be friends. I want every player to have at least one friend from the other team.
mm,
And that's really hard to do. It's hard to do that organically. It's hard to encourage that in a way that's organic and doesn't feel forced, right? So, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's one way of actually getting to be able to do practice a little bit differently, right? Because then it's not so bad playing 1v1s and talking about matchups and things like this when it's someone that you actually like and respect and you want the best for them, right? You watch their games, you cheer for them, you want to see them win, right? And you see something that like holds them back, and I can help them with that, right?
mm,
So I think encouraging that kind of mentality and that kind of environment is definitely a step towards it. If you don't have an academy team, then obviously it's different, right? But I think that's one path that I'm seeing LEC teams currently take right now, which I'm actually really excited about.
mm,
For in general, I think it requires a lot of buy-in, from a team perspective. Um, and as a coach, I've often found in the past that you have to come in, and this I think was especially true before. Now, when people come to Vitality, there's a really clear expectation that, like, bro, if you're in this team, you're engaging with this stuff. If we talk about meditation, like and you're gonna peace out and say you're not interested, then maybe you should find another team, man. Like,
mm,
and we're really, really clear with people about that up front. So I think setting the expectation before the project of this is how we can help you and we believe in this. And if you don't believe in that and you're not interested, that's okay. No stress, no offense taken, but maybe it's not the right team for you. We want people that fit for our
mm,
environment, right? Um, so I think expectations early is a big part of it. Buy-in is a big part of it, right? Where for a lot of coaches, especially if they're going into a new team with new players they don't know, sometimes you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to blow everyone's socks off with how good you are in game, in League of Legends, before they'll trust you. There's a really famous story about CV Max going and 1v1ing all the players on Griffin and beating all of them and then being like, right, so you guys are just going to shut up and listen to me now, right? That's obviously not something that most coaches can do. I think it'd be really embarrassing if I tried to do that. But there are always areas in which, as a coach, the first impression that you make is so important, right? The
mm,
first week of training that you do together is so, so, so important, which is also why, again, like I said earlier, we make all of our coaches go away and invest time into being great positional coaches. I think this is something that a lot of coaches feel that their job in League of Legends is to look at like macro, and then micro is the player's job. And I think if you take that attitude, then there will be players that you can just never get buy-in from in the same way as you would if you're able to be like, nope, this auto was bad. Here, your combo was wrong. Here, you should be clicking here, etc., etc., etc. Right? Like it's very, very different when you engage on a player in that way. The level of trust and understanding that you can build up with them
mm,
is really different. Um, the final thing is, I think having behaviors that are value driven rather than behaviors that are kind of short term gain driven, right? Or emotion driven, right?
mm,
Um, so the story that we tell ourselves is a big part of that, and the people that we have around us is a big part of that, right? But having a shared value of, okay, you know, if the story that we tell ourselves is we're only ever going to win if we copy what other people do, then of course you're never going to be willing to practice differently, right? But if the story that we tell ourselves internally about who we are as a team is we don't have the same resources, we don't have the same culture, we don't have the same players, we don't have the same whatever, you can turn that into a strength. Even in a team where you are not getting paid, playing at stupid hours. Do you remember the Rocks Tigers? way back in the day that played like the series versus SKT, bro.
Yeah.
Those guys, their whole story was they were five rejects that no one wanted that came together and played in a like 40-degree Celsius room with like five bros packed into this tiny, tiny capsule of a room with no air conditioning. And their shared underdog story brought them through it, right? Um, and if you can apply that type of story to yourselves internally about who we are and what's important to us, then you can overcome lots of different things, and you can be willing to do things in different ways, right? That we don't have the resources to do X, Y, Z, right? One might be we don't have position coaches. Okay, well, what can you do?
Mm.
Can you position coach each other? Can you do theory sessions with each other? Can you reach out to other players? And right, that's a way that we do something differently, right? Based on the story that we're telling ourselves of how do we get past this, right? And so you might have a value there of like, we don't have these resources, so we need to be creative. That might be the thing that you come into the team at the beginning of the year and say, right, we are going to be the most fucking creative team in the league, right? So we're going to spend more time reaching out to other people. We're going to spend more time talking to one tricks in solo queue about how you build and play this champion to get more effective knowledge so you can go away and use it. And that way you bypass not having a position coach. We're going to spend more time, I don't know, planning level ones to get advantages over other teams so that we can disrupt their game plans, right? All of these are ways that come out and allow your team to be bold based on a value that you've come up with that's just based about your internal narrative about yourself, right? And I think the narrative that you tell yourself in life and as a team is so important.
Yeah, I think again, there's so much to pick apart here. Something obviously values and cultures are like one of the biggest things that every organization tries to solidify. One thing I'd love to hear about you is what do you do when behavior from a player that's been in the organization starts to fall away on the wayside from the agreed upon values and standards? How do you how do you effectively pull them back in without scolding or shunning them, Like how do you go about doing those things?
So I think the ideal is that you as a coach manage to create a culture which enforces itself. And that is a really lofty goal, right? I think the way that you start by doing that is by making the team our team rather
Hmm,
than my team.
for sure.
Uh, And that's hard and it requires probably some sacrifice from you as a coach in terms of, if you come in saying, this is my system and this is how we're going to play, blah, blah, blah. Unless you've perfectly hired five players who believe in you, trust you, and fully buy in, which is possible, you can do that. And if you are a coach who is not willing to compromise on their system, coaches exist like that. And successful coaches exist who are like that, right? And it just means you have to hire perfectly, right? Um, if that's not you, then you find common ground between people and it becomes our culture,
Hmm.
our values, our system, right? And hopefully at that point, when someone falls away from that, then the team itself self-corrects, right? It becomes a self-maintaining organism. It becomes this complex system that looks after itself. It takes care of itself because having people understand that they're part of something that's bigger than themselves allows them to like take pride in it, right? And if someone walks all over something that you take pride in, then that is a very different dynamic to, oh, this guy's kind of behaving in a way that's a bit shitty, but it's kind of fine, which is often the way that the downward spiral happens. It's a slippery slope, right? Um, if that isn't the case, and that's really hard to achieve, right? I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I've done it super well either, right? This is in a theoretical, abstract sense that's would be wonderful. Um, in a like pragmatic sense, I think you as a coach need to prioritize those things really, really aggressively. Um, I think my favorite book on culture is by Ben Horowitz, and it's called "What You Do Is Who You Are."
Hmm.
Um, and it's just that simple, right? Like the rules that you have, the standards that you set, the way that you behave as a leader, the things that you tolerate as a leader define what the culture is. It doesn't matter if you talk about honesty all day if someone lies to you or you lie to someone else, God forbid, and you get found out, well, it doesn't matter how much you talk about honesty, man. So those things need to be prioritized. They need to be lived by you, first of all, and then they need to be lived by your what you'd call your subordinate commanders, if you're Jocko Willink. The people that are your enforcers is another word that people use for them, right? Like make sure that you have guys who are willing to champion that and that they live it. Um, and it needs to be prioritized. And if someone falls out on it, if someone does slip up on it, it needs to be addressed first, you know. Like before the point about what happened in game here and before the other thing here, right? If this is a core value that we've decided on together and someone isn't living up to it, we address it straight away. We don't let it fester.
Yeah, I really like that. And I just wanted to kind of change the line of questioning here a little bit because as we've talked, you've always struck me as a remarkably curious coach, which I think is one of the biggest strengths a coach can have. It's always being curious, it's always being silly, it's always trying to find that edge. You apply that to your, not only your team culture, but you apply that to yourself. With New Year's not too far around the corner, at least at the time of recording, this is probably going to come out in the new year. Um, what are you curious about learning in the new year outside of the game, more to the art and the craft of coaching?
Mm.
Where does your curiosity lie?
That's a great question because I've actually spent the last couple of weeks discussing this with someone. So I have a few personal goals, right? Um, And I think one of my personal goals is to really investigate the idea of storytelling in coaching. We talked a little bit about narrative already and how powerful that can be. And the idea that a coach can craft the narrative to a team to get people to buy into this sense of unity is fascinating to me. And it's something that I don't think I've been good at, or something at the very least I would like to improve at because it inspires me so much. I think that humans, well, I'm pretty confident that humans make their decisions emotionally and not rationally. And I'm pretty confident that the things that impact people's emotions the most are the stories, right? Humans, it's such a fundamental part of being human is handing down stories and mythology and all of these things, right? The whole book Belonging by Owen Eastwood is essentially based on this, right? And that book influenced me a lot. Um, that's kind of how culture forms, right? It's the stories we tell ourselves. And one of the coaches that really inspired me is Phil Jackson. Like if I could be the X of esports, you know, the coach of esports who is most like whatever other coach, it would be Phil Jackson. You know, I would love to be remembered as someone who was kind of like Phil Jackson. You know, that's he's on my personal board of directors. Put it that way, for people that I would like to follow and take inspiration from. Um, and you know the documentary, The Last Dance. The reason it's called The Last Dance is because that was the story he decided to tell,
Hmm.
and that was such a powerful story. You know, to be able to get everyone pulling in the same direction. And I think just those words, The Last Dance, right? It's so poetic. It's so artistic. It gives such a big like the imagery there is so strong, right? Like to me, dancing and the amazing part is that you know everyone interprets that differently. You could interpret that in a sorrowful way, but to me, dancing is such a joyful act, right? Um, and the the idea that it's the last dance to me also, and this is my personal interpretation, is so much about being present with it, right? Of stopping to smell the fucking flowers every day and realizing that this moment that you get to live it once, right? Um, so that whole, you know, and he did this every year, right? Like he had a different name for every year for the journey that they took together, right?
Hmm.
And that was a big core component of how he got everyone pulling in the same direction. And I love that, right? There's a bunch of people who you can look at for kind of narrative coaching. So I'm looking at into all sorts of things, you know. I would love to get like voice coaching, for example. I would love to become better at making speeches. I would love to become better at having a clear narrative, right? And these are things that are like, how to put it? They're really authentic to me. And I think if it's done authentically, then it will shine through. But it's also a bit scary to be really authentic like that sometimes, right? You have to be quite vulnerable with the people around you. And if you don't commit to it fully, then it can be a bit half-hearted or it might even be a bit cringe to players, right? This word comes up a lot in esports when you try to do new things that are cringe, right? Because they're uncomfortable. And so I'm really interested in developing that craft as being a storyteller and getting it right for as a way to motivate, right, and to inspire.
Hmm. Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, if I'm allowed to ask, if I'm allowed to ask, and you're more than welcome to say no comment, me being a little bit of a journalist here, what's the story for you personally going into 2025, and what's the story for the team? Feel free to give me a non-answer here because I don't want to
No,
spoil
it's an
anything.
awesome question. It's an awesome question. I mean, I think personally for me, mm, hmm, do you know, I'm still working on it, to be honest
Hmm.
with you. I think there are a lot of themes coming together for me right now in my life. And they are all of those themes are like intrinsically linked to fatherhood, right? Because my aim in in life right now is to make Vitality the best place to work in the world and to be the best father I can possibly be. And I think those two things are joined together, right? Because I
Hmm.
really believe that it takes a village to raise a child. And as I said earlier, I want Vitality to be the type of place where people would be proud to raise their children.
Hmm.
Um, like really creating this village, I think would be a big part of the personal story for me, and I think that would be a massive success for me. You know, if I came out at the end of the year and we had an environment that felt like that, and if everyone walked out from Vitality remembering it that way, that would be such a massive success to me. Uh, for the team, I think there are lots of different themes that we can go with, and there's definitely not a kind of catchy one-liner like the Last Dance that I've come up with yet. That's for sure. Um, I'll tell you that yesterday we did a presentation on military history with our players,
Hmm.
um, and what you can take from military history, and what you can take from the triangle offense. I'll tell you for sure that Liverpool FC is a big part of our theme.
Oh
We're
no.
we're really inspired by Jurgen Klopp. We love the Jurgen Klopp style of playing
Hmm.
football and the style of coaching as well. So I think there are a lot of theming options going on there. If I had to use one word to describe it, it would be intensity, which is the name of a book that inspired me a lot, by Pep Linders, who was Klopp's assistant coach.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's for sure a bit nebulous right now, but I think it will all come together.
Well, what sounds like to me is all the players are going to be filling in for some babysitting hours while you get some rest, and that's going to be the intense part for the year, right? That's how I'm taking it. I know that's not how you mean it, but no, Mac, thank you so much for your time. If you have any last words, if you have any last piece of advice to sprinkle to the audience and anyone who listens, now's your time. Otherwise, yeah, thank you.
If I could give myself one piece of advice for to my younger self, it would be to be reading more books. Also, shut up and listen. Stop fucking talking so much, because I wasn't very good at listening back then. Um, but I like. There's a quote from Ramdas, who's a kind of a seen as kind of a guru that I like a lot.
Mhm.
It's really simple. Be here now.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I really like that.
Thank you, man.
I think that's a good place to end that actually. Be here now. But yeah, thank you so much. Good luck with off season. Good luck with the start of 2025. We'll always be rooting for you. And yeah, maybe something in the future again if we can
Hell
grab
yeah.
you.
Thanks so much for having me on, man. It's a pleasure.